Okay, picture this. It's the year 1401. You've got one guy who's conquering the world with sheer force, and then you have another guy who's explaining scientifically why that massive empire is actually doomed to fail. This is the incredible story of the day these two men met face to face. So first up, let's meet our conqueror. We're talking about maybe the most feared man on the planet at the time. A warlord who had just carved a path of absolute destruction all the way from Delhi to Baghdad. His name was Tamerlane, and right now his massive armies is camped just outside the walls of Damascus, ready to strike.
But inside that city, under siege, is our other main character, a scholar. And his weapons? They aren't swords or shields, they're ideas. His name is Ibn Khaldun, and he's a historian who has spent his entire life studying one thing: the nature of power and why great civilizations fall apart.
So while the city's leaders are inside debating whether to surrender, Ibn Khaldun decides to do something completely different, something way more dangerous. He decides he's going to go out there and meet the conqueror himself.
So, what on earth happens when the greatest mind of the age meets the most violent ruler alive? Well, that's exactly what we're about to find out. This is the story of that incredible meeting.
I mean, you really have to picture this. This is how it all started. Not with some grand negotiation, but with a 68-year-old man being lowered by a rope, in the dark, right into the middle of the enemy camp. He didn't bring any gold, no treaty of surrender. He brought an idea, a theory.
And what happened next is just mind-blowing. Tamerlane didn't threaten him. He didn't execute him. He listened. For 35 straight days, the most powerful conqueror on Earth sat and debated with this scholar about the hidden forces that shape history.
So that's the big question that drives everything, isn't it? What could this scholar possibly know that was so important, so valuable, that the world's most powerful man would literally pause his conquest just to hear it?
To get to the bottom of that, you first have to understand the world that made Ibn Khaldun, a world that was defined by one thing: total and absolute collapse.
See, Ibn Khaldun was born into a life of privilege and learning in Tunis. He had the best education money could buy. But then, in 1348, when he was just a teenager, the Black Death arrived. And it wasn't just some far-off disease. It was the end of his world. It wiped out his parents, his teachers, pretty much his entire social circle.
And those are his own words. That unbelievable trauma taught him a lesson that would shape his entire life's work. Civilizations are not permanent fixtures. They're fragile. They're like living things that can get sick and they can die.
Now, after all that loss, he didn't just retreat into a library. No, he dove headfirst into the chaotic world of politics, working for all sorts of different rulers. And his career really became his personal laboratory. He got thrown in prison, he was exiled, he was betrayed, and through all of it, he started to see the same pattern over and over again. A cycle of decay, corruption, and collapse, and it didn't matter who was in charge.
So finally, in his 40s, he steps away from it all. He retreats to this remote castle, and in just 5 months, he writes his masterpiece, the Muqaddimah. And this is where he lays it all out, what he believed was the hidden code that governs all of human history. He called this new field Ilm al-Umran, which basically means the science of civilization. Now, his big idea was totally shocking for the 14th century. He said history isn't just a random bunch of stories about kings and battles. No, it's a science, and it has predictable laws just like physics. He even said, look, if you hear a story about the past that just doesn't make sense, if it violates the basic rules of how people or economies work, then it's probably not true. I mean, this was the birth of historical criticism hundreds of years early.
Okay, so if history is a science, what's the engine driving it? What's the core principle? Well, for Ibn Khaldun, it all boiled down to one single, incredibly powerful idea. He called it Asabiyyah. You can think of it as social cohesion or group solidarity. Basically, it's the glue that holds a people together. That shared sense of purpose, that feeling that you're all in it together and you're willing to sacrifice for the group.
He noticed it was strongest in places where life was tough, like with desert nomads who absolutely had to rely on each other just to survive.
And this contrast is really the key to his whole theory. You have the founding generation, right? They went through hardships, so they're unified and their Asabiyyah is super strong. But then you fast forward a few generations, the descendants have grown up in luxury and comfort, self-interest starts to take over, and that social glue, it just starts to dissolve.
And this is what creates that predictable, inescapable cycle he was talking about. So, let's walk through it. Hardship creates unity. That unity lets a group take power. Power brings them wealth. Wealth creates a comfortable, luxurious life, but, and this is the key, that very comfort is like a poison pill. It destroys the unity that got them there in the first place. And the final step? Collapse. And for him, this wasn't about judging people as good or bad. It was just an observation, like a law of nature. And his insights into economics were just as sharp. He noticed this pattern in dynasty after dynasty. At the beginning, the rulers keep taxes low. This gets people excited to work and build things, right? So the government actually ends up with a lot of revenue. But later on, the next generations want more luxury, so they jack up the taxes. What happens? People stop trying so hard, the economy slows down, and, surprise, surprise, government revenues actually fall. He was warning people way back then that sky-high taxes ultimately destroy the state.
So why are we talking about a scholar from the 14th century today? I mean, what does this have to do with us? Well, because his analysis feels incredibly, almost eerily relevant. He wasn't just explaining his own world, he was handing us a toolkit to understand ours.
You know, when European scholars finally stumbled upon his work centuries later, they were just floored. They were reading fully formed theories of sociology, economics, even systems theory, all written down long before anyone in Europe had even come up with names for those fields.
His ideas weren't stuck in his own time, because he wasn't just analyzing medieval politics. He was analyzing something much bigger, universal patterns in how human societies work. You could say he was a modern thinker who just happened to be living in the medieval world.
And all of this brings us to his big, unavoidable question, but applied to us, right now. In a time where we see so much political polarization, when trust in our institutions seems pretty low, and there's all this economic strain, what is our Asabiyyah? What's the social glue that's actually holding us together?
And of course, the follow-up question is the one that really sticks with you. Ibn Khaldun showed us the pattern. He laid out the cycle. So, what happens when that binding force disappears?
Look, he never said we could escape this cycle, but he was adamant that we have to understand it. The lesson he left for that conqueror, Tamerlane, and maybe the one he left for us, is really that simple. Study the past and recognize the pattern.